going to go through the Pryor Mountains from one end all the way to the other. We're going to come back out this side. I don't know, there's about half a dozen ways across here, so we're riding with the club today. We're just following them. Since we have two types of radios, we got both of the radios on, and we're being anchor man, which I don't know. We end up doing that a lot on the club runs. We end up being the guy in the back, being sure people get stuck, get out, get back on the trail. Yeah. So it's about an hour later, and we're still driving around the edge of the mountains to start on the other side.
It's a beautiful day.
It is. It's kind of windy today, but it's clearing off.
The sun is out.
Should have a nice day here. In this first part of the Pryors, we go by old uranium mines. There are warning signs up, and you're not supposed to go into these uranium mines, and they don't want you camping here because of the radiation. The uranium content was not very good. It is really cool to find the rocks. They're kind of fluorescent green and orange, all tied together in a limestone. It's really cool to see them. You're just not supposed to put them under your pillow.
His body bound and drenched in tears, they laid him down in Joseph's tomb, the entrance sealed by heavy stone. Messiah still, and no but on the third at break of dawn, the Son of Heaven rose again. Oh, trampled death, where is your sting?
The name Pryor Mountains is English, but if you were to go to the native name for the mountains, it was the Arrowhead Mountains. And that's partially there's two different reasons. One is it's a limestone mountain range filled with agate, jasper, chert. There's perfect rocks around for making arrowheads. The second reason is there's a huge amount of arrowheads just laying on the ground up here. And a lot of these arrowheads, of course, they predate the Crow, they predate the Northern Cheyenne, and they go back to a tribe known as the Sheep Eaters. The Sheep Eaters were not a horse-traveling native group. They did use some dogs, and they pulled their stuff around, but they basically followed the bighorn sheep. Now, they had some incredible talents. They would make giant nets. In fact, some of their nets were found in a cave near Cody, Wyoming once, still intact, stored in a cave. They would take these nets, and occasionally you find traps where they would herd the bighorn sheep into little areas where they could then throw the nets over the top of them off of a cliff or whatever and capture them and then stab them. And the sheep were their main source of food, and it also had some other connotations for them. One is the ram's horns off the bighorn sheep were known to have been the primary ingredient for the bows that they made. There was no better bow made than a bow that was made by the Sheep Eaters. They would take the ram's horns and they would take them and soak them in a geyser. So from the Pryor Mountains to where the geysers are is probably about 70 miles or 80 miles, maybe before they can get to the first geyser. They would trek up there and they would leave the antlers in a geyser for a year, and then they would go back and get them. Then they would use different sorts of glues and stuff, and they would cut the ram's horn into strips and build a resin-like bow. It was a very short bow, and their bow was so valuable, the bows that they made, They said that they were so powerful, even though they were short, that they could shoot all the way through a buffalo when they had so much pressure on them when you shot them. And they also said of these bows, they were extremely beautiful, and because being made, I'm sure, of all of these banded layers of ram's horn, that they would trade up to 13 horses to get one of these bows. So, like, you might see a leader in the Northern Cheyenne have one of these bows. It was a prized possession to have a sheep-eater bow. The sheep-eater tribe itself was absorbed both by native tribes nearby, and the last known sheep-eaters that were interviewed were in the late 1800s on a reservation, but they basically went extinct. So when you're up in the Pryors and you're finding different things, a lot of the artifacts and rock tools you're finding are from the sheep-eaters. Now the Crow also were moved into this area. They were pushed out by the Sioux and found themselves making the Pryor Mountains, the base of them and around them, kind of their home. And they would actually winter on the far side of the Pryor Mountains, and you can find teepee rings and stuff in that valley near Crooked Creek. They had a legend, and I don't know. I think, from my understanding, the legend even went back to the sheep-eaters, that there were little people in the mountains. They were supposedly they had poison arrows. Supposedly they were not much taller than an infant child or a young child, and they would poison you. They would paint themselves like grass, and they were camouflaged. And there are legends of them eventually being burned out. They found their village, they set it on fire and killed them all. But there's not been a lot of evidence to that. And yet another thing that the Pryors are known for is Crooked Creek is a creek that holds the native species of cutthroat trout in it. And because the creek itself has so many drops and things it goes through before it gets to any other water, this population of cutthroat trout are considered to be the most pure, unmixed cutthroat trout. And all of our fish hatcheries actually have the cutthroat trout that are planted around the state that are native, are planted from fish that were originally taken out of these creeks in this area, because they were the last place where the fish hadn't been mixed with brookies or other rainbows or other trout that had been brought into the state. Even as far back as the early 1900s, other fish were brought in. But the fish out of Crooked Creek were considered original. And there's a couple springs on each side that also had some cutthroats in it, and they were considered by far the most pure cutthroats. Pryor Mountains are known for fossils. There are many, many canyons with fossils. Some of the first explorers that came through the Pryors found whole skeletons of tortoises, giant tortoises, larger than buffalo, they said. There were all sorts of large leg bones and everything. There's been many dinosaur finds out here, and occasionally you'll find a dinosaur dig out here. I know one of the recent ones, probably in the last 10 years, they found like 18 duck-billed dinosaurs that all in one spot where something had caved in upon them. So when you're in the Pryors, there are lots of fossils as you look around. There are all sorts of shells that are fossilized, squid tails, there's shark teeth, there's fish fossils, there's all sorts of things laying about, besides the agates and the other rocks that can be found. So if you are a rock hound, just remember you can't take vertebrate fossils, but the other fossils, you're welcome to look at them and take a few home as souvenirs for your trip. Mountains also have several cabins up here. We have found a couple in dead-end canyons that I won't necessarily tell you where they're at, but they may date back to the age of moonshiners from the looks of it. They don't look like they were older than that. There's also some cabins up here where it's rumored that Chinese rail workers stole away and lived for a period of time. There's old ranchers' cabins up here that they use to monitor their herds up on top of this mountain range. And a BLM officer once told me they found a cabin back here by accident because you can't be seen from the air. There's not a trail going to it. And it basically was a perfect encapsulated trapper's cabin. There were guns, there was all of his supplies, everything was still in the cabin just like it was when he left it. And they don't know if he died or what happened or who it was. There wasn't really any identifying stuff. But they did find a cabin back in here in one of these canyons that was just totally immaculate and full. They were able to get a lot out of it.
Deep cleansing breath.
The Pryor Mountains are also known for caves. There are many, many caves. Some of them have been mapped out to miles and miles and miles that they go underground. There's at least 2 big ice caves. There's a Mystery Cave. There's the Four-Eared Bat Cave. There's Royce Cave. There's a lot of different caves you can go in and out here that are all different sizes. Some of them are gated and locked, and you have to get the BLM key to get inside the cave, like the Mystery Cave, for example. And they won't let you in until after certain dates because there's several thousand bats in there, and they don't want them getting scared out of hibernation before there's actually food for them to eat and then having them starve. So.
Whoa! That was fun. Thank goodness we're not on a ledge. I would be dying.
One would be amiss to not tell you of some of the more modern things that the Pryor Mountains are known for. One is it became a place where they started putting wild horses. So on the top and on the back side of the Pryor Mountains is the Pryor Mountain Wild Horse Range. And in this particular mountain range, there are, in these herds in this range, there are what are known as blue roans, which is almost a gray bluish looking horse with a red mane and a red tail. They're very beautiful. And that's a population that they monitor up here, and they're kind of isolated in they're surrounded by canyons on one side and a highway and desert on the other side. But they are up here, and this time of year, it's hard to get back to them. They're pretty safe in the wintertime because they're all over on the other side, and from this side of the Pryors, you can't really get to them. As we come down the Beaver Slide, we end up on this Sage Creek side of the Pryors. We are actually bordering the Crow Reservation, and there are some significant things over here too. There's a buffalo jump over here. Again, most of that is what would be the word protected area. They don't even let people know exactly where to go to find it because so many people will steal the artifacts. The other thing that's hidden over here on the other side in the Crow Reservation is there is an old Crow burial ground where they built, I guess you'd call them like a loft out of logs, and there are bodies laying out in the sun, drying in the sun on this side of the mountains as well. So there's some roads and things here that are strictly watched, closed, whatever, so you can't get back to those areas, and in case anybody would want to try to steal anything. There's also a lot of springs and cool things over in the Sage Creek Canyon. There's actually a fish population in Sage Creek. It's just a dinky little creek, but you can catch some nice fish out of it. There's a Forest Service area you eventually will get to with a campground in it, and it's a fun area to explore. When we get to this overlook at the back of this canyon, we're actually looking over towards the Wolf Mountains, and then that is all reservation off over that way on the other side of what's known as Bighorn Canyon. So they have buffalo herds and such over there still. So it's just a neat area where you can come to one side of the Pryors and look across the valleys and canyons and see the other side.
This one is not as tight. And it's a rope.
It still has.
A little bit of a...
You gotta watch your tire on that side. Not to hit that stone, that's all.
May His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May His presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, He is with you. May His presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, He is with you. May His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May His presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, He is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming, in your going, and your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 yeah.
Bump, bump, bump. Did you ever ride a lump? Oh, that's gross. Now my door handle's gonna be all gross.
Here we are coming back to our windmills. We've had went all the way through the mountains, had a bunch of snow, had a bunch of mud. Coming back to where the guys pulled their vehicles off the trailers.
Yeah.
I've never seen this many of these spinning out here. His face shine upon you.
Lord, turn